Hello and welcome to How to Deal with Grief and Trauma. My name is Natalie Himmelrich. How to Deal with Grief and Trauma is completely self-funded, produced and edited by me, Natalie Himmelrich. Consider making a small donation to support the podcast. Go to bit.ly/support, capital G, capital T, and podcast. I repeat, bit.ly/supportgt podcast. Thank you so much. And for more information, please visit Natalie's website, join the podcast Instagram page, and subscribe to the newsletter to receive updates on future episodes. So welcome back to How to Deal with Grief and Trauma. Today I have the honor of introducing someone very special, Jen, who was a client of mine for a couple of years following the heartbreaking loss of her daughter. Jen's journey through grief is nothing short of inspirational, and I've invited her to share her story because it offers so much hope and insight. When we began working together, Jen was deeply immersed in the overwhelming pain of her loss. But over time, we worked together. I've had the privilege of witnessing her incredible transformation, how she embraced her grief, worked through the difficult emotions, and ultimately rebuilt her life in a way that honors her daughter's memory. About today's guest, Jennifer is a mom of 3, 2 living and 1 angel. She's a board-certified family medicine physician, dedicating her personal life to comprehensive care for all her patients, and is passionate about continuous, lifelong learning. She spends her private life exploring the world around us, near and far, with her children and wonderful husband. Jennifer's daughter Neve passed in 2022 at the age of 9 weeks. Jennifer carries the memory of her daughter's sweet and kind soul with her in every facet of her life, and considers it to be the greatest honor to have known, held, and to continue to love her. So Jen's story is a testament to resilience, and I believe her experience will resonate deeply with those of you navigating similar paths. So Jen, thank you so much for being here today and for your willingness to share your journey.
Yes, thank you, Natalie.
So why don't we start, as I always do, with you telling the listeners, as much as I know your story, let's start with you telling them a little bit about how loss and trauma has been part of your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's hard to even think about how to start that, because once you have loss, it basically redefines everything about you. And so you have your life pre-loss and then you have your life post-loss. And for me, every aspect from the day that we lost our daughter has been defined by her,
Mm-hmm.
and defined by the experience of that. You feel more, you cry more, or I do. I feel more. I feel sadness more. But I feel joy more, because then you know what joy feels like when you haven't had it for a while. I think I connect more with people because I have become less of a fixer. That's probably the biggest lesson of loss that has taught me, is like, things aren't here to be fixed. And you've just got to really leave space for a lot of people and emotion and terror and hurt and trauma, but also happiness. You need to leave space for all of this to happen. So it has, and it speaks to kind of, what my life was like before loss. And I was a fixer. I'm a physician, but I think it just completely changed my approach to the emotional person. And yeah, that's where I'm at. So I guess short answer is every aspect of me from like the inside out was determined and changed.
So I
And
guess those people listening, might wonder, well, what happened to Neve? If you might want to share a little bit about your family, so that they maybe can relate to what happened or when it happened. You also had a daughter at that time. Why don't you give a little bit of family background?
yeah, so my family, I was married to my husband in 2016. We were together a very long time. And then we had our first daughter in 2018 and our second daughter, Neve, in 2022. We lost her at the age of 9 weeks. We still don't know everything and to why, but she did have a heart condition that we think contributed to that. And so we lost her at the age of 9 weeks. And at the time, my living daughter had just turned 4.
Mm-hmm.
And so my husband and I had to still, rally around our living daughter. And it actually probably was the first logical thought that I had in all the mix of everything. I actually still remember that thought was, hey, I still have a living daughter and I have to get up for her.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that was probably the first logical thing that came into my brain during the whole initial loss. And so that truly probably is that like defining moment of where my journey started was I've got to get up for this, for my daughter, my living daughter.
Mm-hmm. Now, also, given you're a physician, I wonder how that impacted you in terms of the loss. I mean, you understand medicine in a much more detail than I would understand when my daughter died. So how did that inform your loss at the time, being medically trained and then losing your daughter, as you said, not knowing exactly, but how was that?
That was a huge hurdle for me, was that I was not satisfied with any of the answers that I got, because they were surface level. And I was like, well, no, but how? But what? But that's not enough information for me. And so my mind is always looking for more. And I delved into like the deepest, darkest world of information. And I probably read, I can't even tell you, probably encyclopedias worth of information on everything from heart conditions to loss to babies who die or to pass away in their sleep. I read everything for months.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah. And because I just wanted to know more and I was just never satisfied with answers that I was getting. And like when I look back, I think, okay, I see where they were coming from and I kind of see what they were telling me, but I wasn't hearing things because I just wanted more and I wanted detail and I wanted mechanism and I wanted answers in like a very academic way. When really, even in medicine, there is so much ambiguity, which I have always counseled people on. Like, hey, there's never black and white. There's so much in between. But I was then that person looking for answers.
Yeah, I
In
remember.
yeah. And in the only way I knew how.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it had given me so much in the past. Like I had found so many answers in the past to so many things. But my journey did not provide me with the answers in that time frame for me.
That must have been quite challenging, especially in your own life with your own daughter, not to have the answers that you were looking for as a medical practitioner. That's what's at the base of your being.
Oh yeah, because it defined me
Hmm.
for so long. And I think that was another thing that I really was conscious of very early on, is I said to myself, I know where your mind is going because you develop a fear. I've lost a child. What if I lose another one? Now I know what it's like. And my mind would go there at times, where I think sort of like a very traumatized brain
Hmm.
goes.
Absolutely.
And I do, and I still have these thoughts that come in, like, what if my living daughter has this heart condition? What if there is, and I told myself very early on, from the scientific standpoint, I can make the argument that no, my living daughter does not have the same condition. And so I did have that inner dialogue going on a lot. And not to get too ahead of ourselves, but when I did have another baby after we lost Neve, and that inner dialogue was present a lot,
Mm.
where you think of the worst case scenario yet again. You have lived it, it's there. But that was kind of one of my points where I did try and do a lot of work on internally, was to say, what is in front of me is reality, versus going along the lines of all the bad that could happen. I don't know if that makes sense.
Hmm.
Um, and I did have very, not to get too technical, I did highly consider screening my other children, with imaging and that sort of thing, and had discussions with my physician and even discussions with people that were familiar with Nev's case. And I had actually been offered screening for them, for my living children,
Hmm.
in addition to genetic screening for my daughter Neve. And I did highly consider it and still think about it. But I've kind of left that to the wait and see kind of thing right
Mm.
now.
Well, I think you make a point about anxiety or worst case scenario thinking, which is basically a way for the brain to future pace past negative or past trauma experiences. And it's in a way to apparently want to protect you from them, where we know that if the case happens, you cannot protect the nervous system from loss and from the grieving experience. But it's a way to do whatever it can to put that out there and say, be aware, this could happen. And I think it's especially interesting to see that through the lens of a medical practitioner as you are, because you have evidence, you have percentage, you have numbers as to how often this might happen. And so you have that background, but you've also got the experience of what your nervous system just does without you asking or without you counterfeiting that with logic. It doesn't just easily shut up and
Mhm.
not speak anxious thoughts anymore.
Mhm. And that had been something that I had really looked into even prior to loss, was this like cognitive illusion that so many of us have, that if I think about the worst case scenario and I go through it, it won't happen to me. And that's this like cognitive illusion that we have, that anxieties, for lack of a better word, are our protection mechanism. If
Mm.
we think it, it won't happen. And I had explored that because I am like a highly anxious person. And I had explored that even prior to loss. But then there are so many then levels that come with grief and loss that intertwine within that illusion, as I call it. Um, and that's probably one of the bigger struggles, I would say, now being 3 years away from the physical loss that I still on a daily basis probably struggle with.
Mm. So I remember you as a client that came quite soon after the loss has happened. So within the first few weeks, you were actually out there. And from what you were saying about your other daughter being present and you had to get off, was that the prevailing necessity for you to say, I need to look at my grief because I need to be present for my other daughter? Was that the reason you searched me out, or what would you say was the reason why you, at this early point, said, okay, I need help?
I think now that I think about it, so there's probably two levels to that. So number one was I know that I felt that I knew that if I didn't come to terms, like I guess in my words, come to terms with losing my daughter, that those feelings, that grief would essentially eat away at me. Um, how do I know that? I mean, like I've seen it in people. I had a quite heavy mental health practice prior to losing my daughter. And I had seen kind of what on I guess emotion and that whole emotional world when it's not dealt with or when it's pushed down, I see what it does. And I've seen it eat people away, and then it will present itself later in life. And that,
Exactly.
yeah, and in physical things like in addiction or in anger or those sorts of things. And so that was kind of my fear. I think I was legitimately so fearful of that. And then yes, to your point of for my daughter, so that feeds into I need to be her mom. And how down the line am I going to be her mother when or if I'm I'm holding in these terrible feelings, this trauma. And I had read books like in my information gathering stage where often, people's stories. So I had read stories of siblings who had lost their siblings, and things like their parents just never talked about it, and it was this like secret that nobody could talk about, and the living siblings carried that around with them
Mm-hmm.
as something that just wasn't it was so hard on their internal nervous system, their internal soul. And that just, I knew I could not set my living daughter up with that experience. And I wanted her to remember her sister. I wanted her to feel her sister. And I didn't want to be that person that like pushed it away. And so I knew that if I didn't look at this from a bigger lens, then it would sit there. So that was kind of what was the overarching thing in my mind at that time. And I think one of the biggest cravings that I had, like this thing I needed to hear so early on, was like, you can be okay eventually.
Mm.
And I remember talking to you about that. And that's why I found you. And that's why I connected with you, because you had lost and you have your own incredible and complex story of grief and growth. And I thought, and you're academic as well. And I thought that was what I think my soul was searching for, was like, I need somebody to tell me, not that this will all go away, this horrid feeling, this trauma, but that you can be okay. That was kind of what I was searching for when I found you. And it did happen quickly because I was searching so hard and just needed that so much.
Yeah. So, yes, my credo is that personally experienced and also seen in so many clients and people that I've worked with for my books is that even though at the beginning it might not seem possible, which is quite normal in early raw grief, it will get easier with time. Not just with time, but also with what we're doing within that time. So it's like a two-folded street in that. And I remember you were saying to me, you told me that at the beginning and I didn't believe it. And yet at the time later, 18 months or 24 months, you said, actually, I am in a place where I now see what you meant. And the time is irrelevant. What I'm saying with that is that it could be 6 months, it could be 12, it could be 3 years, it could be 10 years. And we're doing this series at the moment of grieving parents, looking back a decade as part of the podcast as well. And it's good for people to get also longer period. In your case, it's 3 years. And I think you're really a real good experience for people to hear, because within that time frame that we worked, it was about 2 years on and off. It really had such a tremendous impact on you personally, and as well, you just mentioned your third child, of being pregnant again. Maybe you want to share a little bit about that, because that was challenging, I remember.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Pregnancy was challenging for me. And it is a very personal experience. And this is my experience. Because I think anyone who has lost a child, there's going to be so many complexities to what your journey looks like, whether that is to have another child, whether that isn't to have another child. But in my experience, the pregnancy of my third child was a very, very sad place. It was like a means to an end, if that makes sense. I was like, I've got to get through this 9 months so that I can have the baby on the other end. There was really no, I didn't find it healing, the pregnancy itself. Like a lot of people ask that, like, oh, do you find, it must have felt good to have like a healthy pregnancy and all of that, because there were so many complexities to my pregnancy with Neve. Because we knew about the health conditions and that sort of thing, just no specifics. And so I get, and so looking back on my pregnancy with my third child, I don't remember a lot of it. And I think it's because so many walls were up in my mind and kind of
protection walls, or what kind?
I think so. I think it was just like my body went into like survival mode to say, okay, we're going to grow this child. We're going to like bring this baby into this world. I am your vessel. But yeah, there was just the walls were up, I think, during that time for me. And then there are just some layers to kind of anxieties that I have about like medical interventions and that sort of thing, because I obviously had to have surgery to have my child, and that was a big deal for me. And there were layers to sort of care that I had received. And so it was a very complex time for me. And to be honest, one that I don't really remember, even though it wasn't that long ago. My son is 18 months old now. It's not that long ago, but it truly, I don't have like memories of that, probably because so much was up during that time.
How did that develop once he was born and now the past 18 months?
So I just knew in my heart that my son was going to be healthy. I just knew. I can't explain it. I didn't need any scans. I didn't need anything like that to tell me. I just knew. I felt it. And when he was born and I heard his cries and I held him, I was like, yes, I knew this is what you would feel like. I knew this is what you would sound like. It felt all very familiar to me.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that was because of Neve and me holding her not too long prior to that, or not a short time, it all just felt very familiar.
Mm-hmm.
There were certain milestones that kind
To be
of
expected. Mm-hmm.
right. And it wasn't like, it wasn't conscious. It was just kind of there. So milestones like, is my son going to need to be in intensive care? Is there going to, like, those sorts of things? And once we get through the milestone, no, he's healthy. Here he is. He comes home with you. There's none of this. And then the milestone of when we lost Neve, which was around the 8.5 to 9 week mark, that did sit heavy with me.
Mm-hmm.
I do remember that.
Yeah.
But that day and that time frame passed very naturally, and kind of came into like to fit into like my relationship with my new baby. So those certain milestones I think did sit there, and I do remember kind of feeling lighter after we got through probably like 9 weeks. And then I know when my son turned 1 year old, where he was sort of starting to become his own little human, like walking around, or not walking, but crawling around, and has his own personality where he's his own person. That also felt like lightness
Mm-hmm.
in a way. Because I didn't, it's funny because I see more of Neve, my daughter, in my living daughter,
Okay.
which is sort of like, because like how think of my daughter Neve is like, she was this kind soul. She had these most amazing eyes that would just look into you and just love you. Like, she just adored when she would look at you. And so she had this like kindness and this kind energy. And in the past year, I've seen that in my living daughter in just very subtle ways. And so I see Neve in my living daughter more so than I see her in my younger baby, which is kind of not what I had expected or what I had kind of thought. I had kind of worried about like the comparison and that kind of thing. But yes, that was kind of my journey into having another child after loss.
Mm-hmm.
It was complex. And if I'm being completely honest, part of the more traumatic sides of loss for me did revolve around pregnancy and did revolve around all of that. And I think I probably still hold that, because I really do not remember a lot
Yeah.
about pregnancy.
And to give a little bit of context as well from knowing your story, there's been quite a few things that happened in terms of the medical care you've experienced during the pregnancy with Neve that, from my point of view, would probably potentially assume there was traumatic situations where your body protects against re-traumatization, and with that, disassociation is a really, really good way to protect yourself from being potentially re-traumatized. Now, looking back, what would you say, what helped you over those past 3 years? What helped you deal with the grief and the loss? What resources would you point out to other people? What has helped you?
So everyone has a very different journey. Mine and what helped me was really taking this head on and taking what happened to my family head on. And my thought, and to this day, my approach to anything in life and any challenge in life is that I look at it and I say, I didn't want this. I didn't choose this, but here we are. And here's how we have to keep going. And so what helped me were resources that helped me develop those tools. And so the number one thing was you, Natalie. We've talked about this, was my journey with you and exploring every facet of grief, from even to the physical side, that just gave me so much context to what I feel, to what I felt, to what was happening in my body. One of the first lessons that you taught me was how the body takes so much time to catch up to the nervous system, or to the processing in the mind, because the mind is so much quicker.
Mm-hmm.
And that lesson, that was very early. I remember that was like very early on. That just gave me so much understanding into what was going on with me, because I remember for like probably 6 months after losing my daughter, I could not get warm. Like my whole body was freezing cold. And I would have like hot baths. I would layer myself into like blankets, but I literally could not feel warmth. And you said, your body is catching up to your mind. Your mind knows you lost your baby. Your body doesn't, and your body's searching for this warmth of your child that it doesn't have. And it was those lessons that just imprinted and then defined, like, oh, I feel this and this is why. So that was so important to my journey, was professional help, but the right professional help that clicked with me. And I think and again, I think one of the biggest things for me was I wanted someone with personal experience, because I'm an academic as well. And I've walked many people through many things that I have not experienced in my life. And so I knew that going into it is, no, I want somebody who knows this feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think other things for me personally, I really rallied around having a purpose and sort of on a day-to-day basis to kind of get me functioning day to day. And that really was around my 4-year-old daughter. I wanted to be her mom. And I knew I wasn't going to be the same mom that I was before, but I wanted to be her mom. And that got me out of bed, because all I wanted to do was sleep. And I think anyone who's been through this kind of maybe probably understands that feeling, where it's just like, you can't get up. But that was the most very important thing in day to day, was I need to be a mom to my daughter. And really I told myself from day one, my husband and I had the discussion, not in the exact words, but basically like, we didn't choose this, but here's where we're at. And we will not be victims of this. We will pick the pieces up. And that was like a very, very conscious discussion between us, and has defined where the last 3 years have been for us.
Yeah. So one of the things, maybe to round this up, which always interests me, is how you as a couple dealt with this, because I remember as talking to you, the two of you have different kind of backgrounds, religious backgrounds, but also the way that you see loss and spirituality. How did that work for you, for the two of you?
So my husband has he has a spiritual side of him that is probably more developed than my own. And he is so there's that aspect to him, but there's also his sort of approach to life in general as well, which is he's an Aries. So he's like a ram. He like rams through life. Like that's his MO kind of thing. He is just that guy. And in the very early stages of our loss, my husband, he just took everything from like he just I want to provide a visual because it's hard to put into words, but my husband basically acted as this barrier so that everything kind of bounced off him so that he could sort of like put his arms around my daughter and I and like take us through, if that makes sense. So he was this like barrier that everything was bouncing off of because he said, no, I got the little stuff. You like, no, you just leave that to me. And so there's that role that he took on without he just did it. It was this like natural protectionist role that he took on as looking at like, how do I protect my family? So that was my husband's kind of initial reaction, I think was like the protectionist reaction as like maybe the provider or something to the family. And then his spirituality was a lot more he's always been more in touch with that than I have. And that really defined how he looked at loss and how he looked at death and life. And he had a very interesting take on it. And he explored that like in his own journey. And his spiritual journey was different than mine. And we were okay with that. It wasn't mine. And still isn't, but we just allowed each other space to see what our journeys were. But at this and in allowing that, like our trajectories were the same because one of us wasn't immersed in like the victim mindset and that sort of thing. We both had the trajectory to say no, like here's our cards, here's how we deal with it. And so our little paths were bumpy and are still bumpy, but our trajectories are still the same, despite the fact that we're getting there different ways.
Yeah.
And then we both very consciously both decided that our daughter, Neve, was going to play a role in our lives and was just never going to be not spoken about, even if it was painful, even if it hurt her memory and her what we felt from her was going to be a part of us. And we both agreed on that. And we still do. So though that was sort of how we grew together. We still have very different approaches to it, but we both have the same, like, I guess, underlying value.
Yeah. The same end result in mind.
Yeah.
Yeah. You just mentioned those three things that people that I interviewed for my first book, Grieving Parents, Surviving Loss as a Couple, mentioned as the three most important things in dealing with a loss as a couple, which was understanding the grief, and this is what we worked on specifically, and understanding the differences that the way you deal with it and the way he deals with it might be different, but understanding first self and then the other, and then accepting and allowing each other different ways. And as you so beautifully said, if the end result, if their aim is the same, then definitely a couple can find their way as to navigate towards the same place.
And we had that discussion, you and I, too, about that, because marriage, like there are a lot of misconceptions about relationships that, that have gone through something like this, and that they don't survive and that sort of thing. And that was a fear of mine, is like, what's going to happen? Apart? Are we going to? And you and I had really talked about that a lot. And you always asked me about Kevin. And so that was always a part also of like our exploration too, was him. And because, and I thought about this the other day, like this grief can be selfish, because we are very focused on like us and what's going on here. And it can be a very selfish journey, even if you're looking at healing and that sort of thing, because it does bring you internal.
It needs to be.
But yes, so like a lot of our discussions were about like, how is Kevin doing? How are you communicating? And you really picked up a lot of small things that could have probably become larger if they weren't dealt with. And I do think I learned a lot about particularly the understanding and giving space in this journey, from you and from our work. I think that was definitely something that was big, especially in my relationship.
So if you were to summarize, what would you wish for parents who might be quite fresh in their grief, who might have experienced, whether it is a loss of a child or someone else, if they're fresh at their grief, what would you want them to know?
I want you to know, I want everyone to know, you will have lightness again. You will feel happy again. You will laugh. I promise you. From the bottom of my heart. I promise you. Because right now, it feels terrible. Like there's no light, but I promise you there is.
Thank you, Jen, for being so willing and open to share your journey with us. Thank you so much, Jen.
Thanks, Natalie.
Thanks for listening to How to Deal with Grief and Trauma. If you'd like to be updated on future episodes, please subscribe to my newsletter on nataliehimmelrich.com. If you need grief support, please contact me for a 30 minutes free discovery session. How to Deal with Grief and Trauma is produced and edited by me, Natalie Himmelrich. To support this podcast, please rate, review, and subscribe to or follow the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you. And remember to keep breathing. I promise it will get easier.